Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Spandana,
And I'm Cynthia.
and we're the co hosts for Wharton Tech Talks. Today, we are joined by Joanne Stonier. Joanne Stonier is the Executive Vice President and Chief Data Officer for MasterCard. Previously, she was the EVP Chief Information, Governance, and Privacy Officer for MasterCard and the Chief Privacy Officer for American Express Company. She's also an adjunct professor at Pratt Institute. Joanne has been recognized as a leader in data and privacy by several organizations, including the Aspen Institute and the United Nations, and has served on the board of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the Center for Information Policy Leadership, and the Information Accountability Foundation. Joanne, we're so excited to host you on the podcast. Where are you calling us from?
Thank you for having me. I'm actually calling from Wharton's campus here in Philadelphia. I'm attending the MSI 2023 Analytics Conference, which is a marketing science conference. And we're talking all about data and AI in the marketing context. So it's been quite a full day and a very interesting conversation. But thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm delighted to chat with you ladies today.
Of course. No, we're so thrilled you're joining us on campus. And the topic seems very relevant to our conversation today. So before we dive deeper into that, can you tell us more about your career path and the key pivots that you've made throughout?
Sure, I've made quite a few pivots. So thank you for phrasing the question that way. I've made quite a few pivots in the course of my education and in the course of my career. And so I encourage all of you listening out there to this podcast to stay curious and keep on learning. Mostly I've made the pivots because the world kept changing as well. So I started my education. I have an associate's in computer science. And I also have a degree in accounting and finance, a bachelor's. And my first job was really as an auditor. I worked for PwC, which is a large auditing and accounting firm. And my first assignments were really computer auditing, which was relatively new. You'll figure out my vintage soon enough and how old I am. But the idea was that computer systems, technology systems, we needed to figure out the controls on the information. And so many of my first assignments with different clients, different companies, was to do computer assisted auditing as well as doing traditional financial statements and financial auditing. And for me, it was a great way in my first job to learn a lot about industry, learn a lot about business while using my computer science background. And my next series of jobs were really in financial departments, but financial systems were being built at the time. And so in many of my positions, I was helping to design finance and technology systems. And I really enjoyed that. But I had an itch that I needed to scratch. And so after a couple of years working, I wound up going to law school at night. I went to St. John's University. And so I would tell anybody who wants to go to law school, go during the day. Going at night's a little bit much. It takes an extra year, number one. And you don't get to enjoy the experience as fully as doing it full time. And so I graduated and I went to work as a lawyer. But I have to be honest, I actually then got a phone call from a recruiter who knew me as a financial professional and as a computer and technology professional. And there was a job at American Express where they were essentially re-engineering a lot of their financial and technical systems. And he thought of me. And so he asked if I would consider the job. And so off I went to American Express. And yes, I did work in their finance department, but lo and behold, one of the jobs that opened up was in their law department, doing the work on their financial systems, on their processes. But when I met the general counsel, she was so intrigued by my background that she had me work as her assistant, also working on legal cases. So pretty quickly into my career, about maybe 4 or 5 years after graduating law school, there I was acting as an attorney, using my finance skills, using my computer skills. And who knew when I was way back in my, undergraduate days that I would be working directly for the general counsel herself. And that was a great experience. And then I had one of those strange pivots happen, and also a very female reaction for all of you ladies who are listening in the audience. The general counsel came to me and she put a position description on my desk. And she said, I think you really need to think about posting for this position that just opened up. And then she walked out of my office. It was one evening and she left for the day. And I looked at the job and it was working for the CEO and chairman of American Express, her boss. And my first reaction was such a female reaction. I was like, she doesn't want me to work for her anymore. And then it took me about, I don't know, somewhere between the office and my commute home to make me realize, no, dummy, she wants you to work for her boss, who is very, very challenging and known to be pretty demanding and brilliant all at the same time. And so I began working I got the job and I started working for the chairman and CEO of American Express at the time, Harvey Golub. And it was probably the best decision I've ever made because I got to be kind of his right-hand person. And those jobs are very unusual. Everyone is unique. But as his vice president and chief of staff, I got to work on investor relations. I got to work on mergers and acquisitions. I got to work on business strategy. I got to work on the different pieces that made up American Express Company at the time, which included back then, they owned the company that is today known as Ameriprise, which was financial advisor services, tax and business services, which was a whole world in addition to their traditional card business and travel services that they're known for today. And so it was a really amazing opportunity because I got to learn about board governance and a whole host of things that I would have never learned if I had stayed working as a lawyer. But I got to use my legal skills, I got to use my finance skills, I got to broaden my business background. And a couple of years after actually learning all about the company, I had the opportunity to go work as the chief operating officer for a small division in American Express called Tax and Business Services that was part of that financial advisor business where we were acquiring all these small tax and business companies. I helped build that. And then lo and behold, Harvey had retired by then and Ken Chenault was the CEO. And they decided to spin off Ameriprise, which is the company that exists today. And I worked on that divestiture. So again, I used my legal skills, I used my financial skills, but I was kind of getting myself out of a job because as part of the divestiture, the whole company was going to be in Minneapolis. And while I could have moved to Minneapolis, and I had lived in Minneapolis for a while, I didn't really want to have that job there. So I actually started looking both inside the company and outside the company. And then lo and behold, Ken Chenault called me up and said, why don't you stop by my office? There's something really interesting and different I want to talk to you about. And he put a big, huge presentation on his desk. He handed it to me. And it was a study about consumer privacy. And he said, I think you should read this and come back to me. It was a Friday. Come back to me on Monday and tell me what you think. But we need a privacy officer. And I think you should take that job. And I was like, privacy? And he was like, just read it. Now, what you don't know is that Ken Chenault, at the time, he was the president and he was the CEO and chairman of American Express. But Ken's background, he was also a lawyer. And so he also had that skill set as well. And when I talked to Ken, he was like, look, Joe, you have come up through the company. You understand the company. You're a lawyer. And this, I think, is going to be hugely important for the company. And so I became the first chief privacy officer for American Express. And that was the beginning of what I would call the big pivot into data as kind of the rest of my career. And so I built the privacy program at American Express. I left American Express because my mom got very ill and I left and took a year to really be with my family. And then I knew different lawyers. I started doing some kind of privacy consulting. I worked at Macmillan Publishing and was helping different companies, establish their privacy programs. And I got a call from MasterCard. And by that point, my non-compete was finished with American Express. So I went to talk to MasterCard and became their first chief privacy officer. I helped them through kind of the language of the GDPR. And as we did that work, we began to realize that we needed a chief data officer. And I kept saying to our CFO, our CEO, our general counsel, everybody, we need a chief data officer. And they kept saying, yep, we do. And finally, they said, why don't you take that job? And so I became the first chief data officer for the firm. And I've held that job for the past over 5 years. And so data has become kind of the language of innovation. Data has kind of been a common thread because data was part of computer auditing way back in the day, but I didn't think of it that way. It was controls, it was technology. But my career has had a lot of different pivots along the way, but throughout it, data has kind of been a common thread, whether it was re-engineering, whether it was using my legal background, whether being a privacy lawyer, privacy officer, understanding data regulation. All of it has really come together through the language, the opportunity, the innovation, the risks related to data. So long answer, but those are all the pivots.
That is such an impressive journey. And, now that we're on the topic of data, we'd love to actually just learn more about your role as the Chief Data Officer. What does that role entail? And, how do you ensure the responsible use of data and AI within MasterCard?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because one of the other things that I'm kind of known for is creating things that don't exist, right? So when I first became a privacy officer, people would say to me, "Oh, you do information security." And I'd be like, no, that's not what I do. And then when I became a chief data officer, people would say, "Oh, you do privacy." And I'd be like, no, that's not what I do. And so chief data officers are relatively new positions. They are different. Now they're also called chief data and analytic officers. So just know that the name keeps changing a bit out in industry. And what I would say to everybody listening is that your careers will change and morph as business and industry and as our society changes. So just know that. So whatever you do, learn how to learn forever because the opportunities are going to continue to change. And so as a chief data officer, my job and my team's job is to really understand how data can be used for innovation in a responsible manner, and we'll talk about what that means, but also understand all the related risks. And as the privacy officer, I understood the regulatory risks related to personal data and sensitive data, including like demographic data and location data. But as the data officer, I really need to make sure that our data is organized the right way, that it's of the right quality for the different kinds of analytics we're going to use, that we have the right systems and methods in order to really do the types of analytics, create new products and services that work in different geographies. And so part and parcel of my job is to create the methods and the processes and the analytics that actually generate new products and services for MasterCard, but do it in a way that all of our cardholders and all of our consumers and all of our banks, all of our merchants actually feel really good about the results and feel like we are really good stewards of the information that we're entrusted with. So that's what my job's about.
No, thank you so much for, giving us additional color. And it's great to see how your interdisciplinary journey has led to this great role, which seems like it's tailor-made for you, right? And I guess one of the things that we have all seen is the power of data and analytics in business. So as you look ahead and as you're in this new role, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you're seeing in the field of data analytics and governance?
Yeah, I think we're at a real inflection point right now. When I first became a privacy officer, MasterCard was using data for analytics. And I can remember I had an opportunity as the privacy officer to review just about every analytic model that we were creating to make sure I understood how we were using data and if any of our card data and our transaction data was being used in any way. I really looked at it because our card data, even though we don't collect your name, what we do have in our data set is the card number. And we put in all sorts of controls and anonymization techniques and privacy enhancing technologies to really make sure it was not personally identifiable. But fast forward to today with generative AI and even what we're now calling classic AI or predictive AI, really the governance of data and making sure you have the right data for the right purpose is becoming increasingly important. And so we have, I think, a world of opportunity ahead of us. But I think one of the biggest challenges is the pace of change and keeping up with that. So today, I think you guys are going to graduate into a world where data is going to enable huge societal changes in healthcare in particular, in financial services, in education, in how we learn and also how we work. some of the repetitive tasks that we might have assigned some of our MBAs, right, that joined different firms, or even our undergraduate students, those tasks are going to be able to be done by the machine. So we're going to be teaching our new hires differently to do higher level thinking faster. So you guys are going to be learning differently, and we're going to have to teach you differently. So the workplace is going to change. So that's one piece. But I also think that part of the opportunity of AI is for us to actually begin to think differently about how we look at the information that we're actually feeding it. So data is food for AI, but so are the queries for generative AI. The questions we ask have to be more precise. So what we're going to be looking at in the workplace is how do we ask the right types of questions so that we don't lead the machine to the wrong question, number one. How do we have the right data so that it has all of the information we need, not misinformation? It's not missing information, meaning the population is complete. We don't have some unintended bias in the information or missing information. We have a representative sample. And then also, how do we create the algorithms in such a way that A, we can understand what's happening, and then we also understand the results. All of that is going to become much more important, and we're going to need all sorts of disciplines to work together on that. It's no longer just data scientists. So everyone with kind of those double degrees out there, it's going to be really important that we all speak the same language of data and technology, but that we also speak other languages as we really look at the impacts as AI and technology and data really begins to transform a whole host of industries.
So as you mentioned, data is critical for innovation, and especially with all of the new growth in the AI space, there's a lot of opportunities to create new products and services that work across geographies as well. But how do you think about, balancing that need and desire for innovation with concerns around privacy and security of customers?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Ever since I've worked at MasterCard, the issue of emerging privacy and security laws across geographies has been something that we've had to handle. And you can add to that now emerging artificial intelligence and machine learning laws, laws around cryptocurrency, laws around data transfer, localization laws. How we design at MasterCard, we design with the individual at the center of all of our practices. So that's the first thing. We also have our data principles. So we've developed principles that put privacy and security first. And then we look at, well, how can we be accountable, transparent, have integrity in our practices? Also, make sure that we address things like bias so that we're inclusive, and also really design for a world that actually works for everybody, right? Because so much of the work that we're now doing, we're realizing like generative AI is being built on English language models, right? And we need to think about how is that going to apply to the rest of the world. But what we do for privacy and security standards is we actually design for the highest common denominator. Because we're a global company and many of our products might be designed and rolled out first in one market, oftentimes they're then adapted for the next market, right? So something might be designed in the United States and then it's rolled out in Europe. Or maybe it's designed in Europe and then it's rolled out in Africa or Asia. So what we do is we design to a global standard, and that's the highest kind of level of privacy and security that we can provide. We believe that kind of individuals would rather us default to the highest standard rather than the lowest standard. Other organizations do things market by market, but my firm, it's just easier for us in some ways, but we also think it's the right thing to do. So what we do is we look at all of the laws, and whatever the highest requirement is, that's how we execute.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, one of the key things that I took away from, the last couple of things you said was, it's all about having A, the right questions, B, the right data, and also having the right algorithm, right? Which has great explainability, transparency, and also, making sure that it abides by the highest standard, like you said, right? To ensure that,
Absolutely.
You're being the most careful with customer data.
It's also having the right team around you. We pay attention to lots of cross-functional experts, right? So we have our AI governance process. It's the product teams. It's our data quality teams. It's folks from my team, the data office team. It's also, data scientists, AI experts, right? We bring in a host of privacy team, our information security team. We bring in a lot of different folks to actually look at our products and solutions as we design them. We call our product development process itself studio because we believe different gates need to be passed before we put things into production. AI gets extra scrutiny, if you will, right? But we do think that lots of different perspectives are really important before we release things into production and into kind of public discourse, because, financial products are probably second only to health products in the sensitivity that people feel about that type of data, right? There's health data, which is very personal, financial data, which is kind of next personal, and then maybe data about kids, right? Where people feel the most sensitive. And so we need to be really not only aware of all the laws, because certainly there are financial privacy laws, but realistically, we want to be a company that people trust with their financial information. And so we want to design in a way that's very sensitive to the type of information that we process.
Yeah, no, thank you for that additional color there. And I guess one of the things that you said very early on about the role of a chief data officer is how do you leverage data and insights while abiding by, all the governance and privacy concerns to create new products that, continue to delight your customers and speak to their needs. So I'm wondering if there's any specific example that you can share of, say, a new product or service that came out of some of these efforts that you'd be comfortable sharing on the podcast.
I don't know that I can give you specifics, right? But I can give you general categories, right? So we use AI to great effect in fraud, right? So if you think about what MasterCard does, right? We make payments safe and simple around the world, right? So you can tap, swipe, or key in the numbers on your card and you pretty much, navigate the world with probably just your phone in many, many markets, right? Or you need your card or at least your card account numbers in others. But you can pretty much go around the world with just your MasterCard and navigate, right? You don't need cash in many cases, right? I know I've taken many trips and I've never reached for cash, right? Because of the world we're living in and the way that wired commerce works. But what we've done is, if you think about it, though, fraud and cybercrime increase as well, right? So that the more wired we are, the more there are bad actors who would like to get at that information and misuse information. And so what we've done now is that we've always had analytics in this area, but we're increasingly using artificial intelligence to speed up our insights and to apply them and then also to share them with our banks, with our merchants, and also with governments, right? In order to fight fraud and in order to fight cybercrime, because we're recognizing that as fast as we are at spotting the patterns, the bad guys, if you will, are also upping their game in using the same new tools to create new fraud schemes, to create new cyber schemes, right? That threaten all of us. And so in some ways, those are two of the areas where we have to keep investing in new technologies and new tools and techniques. But I can't share with you an algorithmic equation, if you will, right? Or a methodology, but just know that those are the places where we invest very heavily in both analytics and artificial intelligence.
And speaking of new technologies, looking, let's say 5 or 10 years into the future, what are some particular emerging technologies you're closely monitoring that you think will, significantly transform the financial institutions in the future?
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, right? I think embedded technologies are going to be, we still have not seen the final degree of the Internet of Things, right? And payments being embedded into various devices. I think we are still at the early days, right? We talk about our phone, right? But I think that there are still going to be, if you think about cars of the future, I think that it's quite likely that your payment information could be part parcel of how you transact from your dashboard, right? If you think about what a car of the future might look like and how you might be able to order ahead your groceries and pick them up or have them delivered, right? Or a meal. I think all of those technologies are ahead of us, but we'll see. I think, we talk about the metaverse. I think certainly commerce is changing, right? Virtual commerce is changing. We will be part of that. We will enable that commerce, I think, into the future. What will the form factor be? I'm not quite so sure. I know we are already working on enabling technologies like identity verification, right? We need to make sure that if you're in a metaverse, I don't know, experience, right? We need to make sure that whatever commercial activity you are taking part in, that I am making sure that your data is only being used by the right parties, right? And that I've also validated, Cynthia, that you in fact are the right Cynthia, and Spandana, that you are the right Spandana, right? For the payments that you are making and the transactions that you are making. So those type of technologies are going to be increasingly important. And we're already working on those pieces of the payment system that's going to be needed for the future. So all of that, I think, is already happening and will be part of whatever changes are 5 years ahead. But if I knew that specifically, I would have a completely different job, I think, right, as a futurist.
No, this is amazing. And, it's always such a treat for us to hear what people who are in these positions of great responsibility are thinking of and what's top of mind for them. So thank you. And, we've picked up these three great trends that you talked about, from embedded tech to the metaverse, and then also building out enablement technology for both these things. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. At this point, we've learned so much about your career. We've learned so much more about, your daily job and the insights and the trends that you're seeing in the market. We'd love to now ask you a couple of questions, rapid fire style, just to get to know you better. Does that sound good?
It sounds like fun. Sure.
Okay, awesome. If you had to change one thing in your career, what would it be?
I think, I'm not sure what I'd change, but I think in my future, there's some kind of fun, quote, fun PhD in my future, like in art history or some kind of liberal arts PhD that I would love to achieve. So I'm not going to say that I'd change it, but there's still an avocation there for me. As kind of someone who's always been interested in art and design, there's something still there for me to do.
And you semi-led your way into the second question, which is, if you could do any other job in the world, what would you do for a living?
Oh, wow. I think there's two things that intrigue me right now. And what we've done to the climate, I would probably want to point my energy either toward the climate or the elderly, because these are two issues, the social issues, that while I can support them from the data lane, I'm becoming increasingly concerned. So it's either I would have been an environmentalist in some way, or do something with the breakdown in our society around the elderly, right? Some societies do it much better than, I think, American society in taking the knowledge of our elders. And I just feel like there's something there that we still have not tapped as in the US. So one of those two things.
Cool. And do you use any AI engines like ChatGPT regularly? And if so, which one?
I use them all right now because I need to understand the benefits and the differences between them. We at MasterCard, we can't put our data on the open sourced engines, right? For obvious reasons. But I do need to understand the benefits and differences between each of them. I have to say that GPT-4 is a vast improvement over its predecessor. DALL-E has some really interesting pieces. And so there are quite a few advancements. And I think I'm curious. Today, there was an announcement by the White House by many of these firms, and they're going to be kind of agreeing on some standards and auditing each other. So I'm curious to see what those advancements will look like. Scale AI is going to be in the mix, and it's a firm that we've been talking with. So I'm very excited by what's going to come next.
Very cool. What's a recent book you read that you recommend?
Oh, my. So there's one book that I would recommend that's kind of in my fire lane is Invisible Women by Carolyn Perez. It's a book about bias, about data bias, and how much of our world has really, we haven't had enough data about women. And so we've imputed an average, a human average, that doesn't always work for women in healthcare and how we design cars and kind of our physical environment. And so it's a great read to just keep you mindful. All of you data scientists out there and technology majors, think about it, read it, and absorb it. Right now, I'm also reading a book. The title of it is My Own Words by the notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I'm enjoying that. And then along with the environmental stuff, I've bought a little house near the beach, and I'm reading all about gardening, seascape gardening, because I'm trying to figure out how to do low water, high, low impact gardening for my little house near Cape May, New Jersey. So trying to figure that out. So I read usually about 3 different things at a time. So those are all on my nightstand right now.
That's awesome. And I hope your garden turns out very well. And final question for you. If you had the world's attention for 5 minutes, what would you say?
Be generous with your fellow humans, with your time, with your skills, with your knowledge. We all share this very beautiful, precious planet. And there are so many changes that are happening to all of us from a technology, a data, and society perspective that it's going to take all of us to figure out how to solve all of these problems and also take advantage of all the opportunities together. And so if we can be generous with each other, and I also mean patient by being generous, I think we have a real opportunity to build a better world together. So I will leave it there.
No, we thank you for your generosity in joining us on this podcast today. It's been such a delight, hearing all about, the pivots that you've made. I think the main takeaway there is we have to be interdisciplinary in today's world, and also seeing how you're applying that interdisciplinary lens into your current role, looking after all of our financial information and making sure that it's used in the right way to drive results for the organization. I think it's been incredible having you on the podcast and also learning more about what's top of mind for you and getting to know you better. So thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.